Okay, so a really nice topic today is using medicinal plants in permaculture systems. And this is an exciting topic for me, and won't, um, I don't have the title of the book, unfortunately, in front of me, so I'm going to just say that Chelsea Green is just publishing a new book out in June. And the paraphrasing, the title is something like that: growing a medicinal forest garden. So it's how to use medicinal plants in a forest garden, in a agroforestry, and of course that would be permaculture as well. And I haven't seen the book; it's because it isn't out yet, but I'm on the list for a review copy. And when I read that this book was coming out, I said, "Oh my gosh, somebody beat me to it." That's a book I've been wanting to write for some time, using permaculture, herb, medicinal plants and permaculture systems. So I hope she did a great job, or better than me even could have. And then I can just refer that book to people. So you can check Chelsea Green's website if anybody's excited about that, as I am. And as soon as I saw that she had written this book I wanted to write, I said, "Oh my gosh, I better write something before it's too late." All the topics will be taken. So I've decided I should almost keep my mouth shut here, but I will say that I decided to put out a book on hugelkulturs, because there's no really big definitive text on that. And so that's one of my goals now, is to get a book out on that topic. Okay. But today, using medicinal plants in permaculture systems. So there's, I guess, three main things I wanted to get across as far as themes, and then we can talk about individual plants as they fit in. But number one is that not only do we want to include medicinals in permaculture systems for their productivity, for their medicines, sometimes also for fruit. I love it when they're edible and medicinal, like elderberry or Oregon grape. You're getting food and you're getting medicine from the same plant. But you also have to look at all the functions we can get out of these plants. And functions is something that isn't talked about so much when people talk about crops. And so I'm going to give a few functions here and a few examples. Let's take, for instance, hedgerows and windbreaks. It's very common that places will need hedgerows or windbreaks. Even yards oftentimes need screening hedgerows to screen out the neighbors or traffic or whatever. So it's pretty typical in permaculture systems to need hedgerows, hedges, and in bigger locations, windbreaks. And so obviously screening, and also for the windbreak. So those are two functions, but the windbreak or hedgerow can fill all of these other functions as well. And so, for instance, it can become a live fence. So you could create your own live fence using medicinal plants to help keep out those pesky deer, or to keep in your tame sheep or other livestock. And so live fences, and what are some great live fences that are medicinal? Hawthorn is a premier live fence. Chokecherries you can include in there as well. Any other number of thorny or at least stiffly upright plants. And you can also include in your hedges, you can also include vines that will vine back and forth like the barbed wire, so to speak. And those would be twining roses or blackberries, which is hard to keep out of windbreaks around and hedgerows around our neighborhood. It could be black-cap raspberries. There's all kinds of things you can add to your live fence to make it pretty much impregnable to everything but rabbits. Rabbits, of course, don't work so good with a live fence. Wildlife food and habitat. Hawthorn is a preferred nesting tree for a lot of different birds. And so you can get your medicine, your food, and your windbreak hedgerow functions, as well as provide food and habitat for wildlife, birds, mammals, and also pollinators. Pollinator habitat is a big one. So there's so many of our herbs are great pollinator habitat. If you have a mixed, diverse herb garden, you're going to have a great honeybee or other pollinator, and other pollinators are going to love you. So if you want, my son just started some beehives here, and so we're going to have really good, we're going to get good honey production because of the medicinals, and we're also going to get good seed production and fruit production because we're getting really good pollination. We also might want some things for biological pest control, like people sometimes put lavender or rosemary or some of these scented shrubs from the Mediterranean that a lot of mammals don't like. So, and it puts out, you might say, a scent or an odor that the plants don't like. The best kind of plants like that, let's say lavender, for instance, is that you love the smell, but the deer don't. Now there's a winner. So you're happy, the deer aren't, and they don't come near the scene as much. And then also there's water purifying. And then another big one is biodiversity. The more species you have on site, the better your biodiversity, the better the system functions. This is a general rule. It may not work every time, but as a general rule, it works pretty good. And that biodiversity is not only plants, it's also birds, arthropods, lichens, fungus, microorganisms, et cetera, et cetera. So the more insects. Now, so there's always some things that you don't want in the system and some things that are pests, but as long as there's just, if they are in there as a mix, they can't get off to, they can't get to a damaging level generally. So generally biodiversity is great insect control. Okay, so those are just some functions. Actually, the list goes on, but I don't want to just keep going too far. But I really want to, actually, I really would like to point out that for our human systems, what's a permaculture system without humanity? In a sense, can you have a permaculture system without humanity? No, permaculture always has humans in it. If it's a wilderness up in the mountains, it's not a permaculture either. A permaculture is human interaction with an ecosystem. But fragrance and color and beauty and aesthetics, texture, all of these things make a habitat, makes the people that live in that habitat happier. And so what are your happy plants? And it might be that some people really love pink or really love yellow. I had someone had me do a design once that he said, I wanted spectacular fall colors. And so I could say, and I designed around that. But I could also say, okay, I want spectacular fall colors from the leaves, but I also want medicinal. And so I would say the wahoo bush, for instance, or the blueberry or the huckleberries. There's the ginkgo for it's just such bright golden leaves in the fall. So in other words, you could design for fall color and for medicinal at the same time. You can design, I like to work fragrance into designs so that there is fragrance at all times of the season. I like things that are blooming real early, like you could have, I can't really mention a few things that I love the smell of because they're not medicinal. I better stick to the medicinals as well. An early spring medicinal that with great fragrance. Well, there's I might have to skip that and say, but there's lily of the valley, which is a toxic medicinal. There are the lavenders, the rosemary. There's many of the there's the various, if you can grow them, the various come on, the jasmines. So we look for, at any rate, I don't have that list right in front of me here, but fragrant flowers that have medicinal qualities. There's quite a few of them. Paulownia, for instance, Paulownia trees is a beautiful purple flowered tree called the Empress tree, or the Empress of China. And that tree has very fragrant, very showy purple flowers. I saw one time that had a wisteria growing up into it. They're both going off at the same time. Wisteria growing on Paulownia. It was a great sight. You just got to give the Paulownia a good head start before you plant the wisteria, so it doesn't get overwhelmed. But that Paulownia is just a fragrant. You can smell that a long ways off. And the bark of the tree is medicinal. Okay, so color, fragrance, and also fragrant foliage. I had a list here of fragrant foliage plants that are medicinal. And one of them, I have several growing in my yard. I'm already out there. And one of them is the Japanese pepper tree. Probably all the pepper trees are xanthoxylum. It's a spice that's used medicinally from Japan, and the foliage is very fragrant. It smells very citrusy. So, and then there's the chase tree, which a lot of women know the chase tree. The chase tree, Vitex agnus costus, is used for PMS and hormonal and cycling and keeping periods on time. It's, so it's to do with women's hormones mainly. Supposedly, it also cuts down men's horniness hormones, and that's why it's called the chase tree, because the monks in the Middle Ages would keep, would be nibbling on the chase tree berries to help themselves stay chaste. Now, of course, there's not much call for chase berries from monks anymore, but there's still quite a demand for women for PMS, et cetera. So, but that chase tree, if you have that in your yard and you're a woman, you can just bury your head in that foliage there and get an incredible fragrance. I remember Rosemary Gladstar, one of our great teachers, herbal teachers, talking about pennyroyal. Pennyroyal is a very fragrant foliage, and she says that just rubbing a little bit of oil on your abdomen a lot of times will bring on a woman's period when she's trying to bring the period on. So it's, and I would imagine that just smelling a lot of that foliage might do the same thing. So in other words, you almost might call it medicinal fragrances. Hi, Mahala. Did you get a haircut? Oh, you're muted. Okay. But at any rate, and it's also nice to see Rafina again as well.
I just unmuted you, Mahala, and you're welcome to unmute yourself too. Should be on the bottom left corner of your screen, perhaps.
Yeah, okay. Periodically I'll ask for questions and stuff. But yes, Mahala, I was wondering if you had a haircut, or is that just an optical? It's just tied back. Okay.
It's just tied back.
Okay,
keep
now
I can
see you better now. Okay. So, okay, well, there's, and also in terms of fragrances throughout the year, of course, besides the fragrant foliages, you also have, of course, tons of fragrant flowers, and you also have, fragrant barks. So in the winter, you can actually have barks that are fragrant. Of course, and one of those is spice bush. Spice bush is a nice medicinal that you can just scratch the twigs and get a fragrance from that. So even in the winter, the dead of winter, you can get smells. And of course, there are late flowering things and early flowering things, like witch hazel is a medicinal plant. Anybody that suffers from hemorrhoids a whole lot will probably know about witch hazel as an extract. And the flowers are incredibly fragrant and beautiful in the spring. So there's a good one. Another fragrance that's really very yummy and from a medicinal is Viola odorata, or that the fragrant violet. Some violets are fragrant, some are not so much, but the odora or odorata is one of the most fragrant of the violets, and a great thing to have growing in your yard or as an understory to trees. It can take quite a bit of shade as well as sun. A fragrant flower is linden. Now, if I needed let's say I needed a shade tree in my yard, and I was planning ahead, and I wanted something that would be medicinal and fragrant and feed lots of bees, I could choose linden, the various lindens or basswood, because it's one of the best honey plants of all in terms of tons per acre, or, well, maybe not tons, but pounds per acre. I don't know if tons is probably getting up there, but of honey per acre from linden trees. And the linden flowers are great medicinal, used a very lot in Europe as a calming, stress relieving tea. And the berries or the fruits can be pressed for oil. And at one stage, it said they can be used as a chocolate substitute. And the wood from the linden tree is a very fine sculpting wood, very white. And so there we have, the linden has multiple products and multiple functions. And so that's an ideal in our permaculture systems, is to put in lots of plants that have multiple production products and multiple functions. If you can have a tree that has one product and one function, just think about a tree that has 5 products and 5 functions, so to speak. So it's probably hard to have something with only one of each. But at any rate, the more diversity, yes, Rufina.
I just wanted to ask you about the linden tree with its substitute for chocolate. I wondered, that grows well in our environment?
Yeah, there's linden trees around Port Townsend. It's common in the northern U.S. and probably even this. I don't know how much about the South, but there are varieties or species of basswood in the southern U.S. too.
Oh, okay.
And across Europe, lindens is a very widespread tree in the northern temperate zone. So there's quite a few of them out there. I usually grow the little leaf linden though, as the one I usually go for. But you can do research. Okay, so there's a riff for a while. Any questions coming up? You can raise your hand, and then we can see if Evelyn can unmute you, I guess. Or you can unmute yourself if your lower part of your bottom part of the picture in front of you. Do you see? Does everybody see where that is? If you click on the picture, you'll see a mute button on the very far lower left. Mihaela's,
okay, there. Okay, I think. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, excellent. So when you were talking, a lot of times you talk about trees and bushes, and my understanding is some of them need to have 2 in order to be able to pollinate themselves, and some of them are self-pollinating.
Right.
So the linden tree, I just got one for my daughter. It's 4 feet tall, by the way. It's only 1. So is that going to be enough, or should we get her another one?
I think lindens are monoecious. In other words, let's see here. With monoecious, that probably means mono, only one flower, one sex on the tree, and dioecious would be both are on the same tree. However, there's more to that story than that. Some trees, there are only female parts on it, and they'll have to have a male tree. For instance, the kiwi fruit vines are like that. There's quite a few shrubs and trees and vines like that. Then there's another kind that has male and female flowers on the same tree, and they pollinate themselves, and you get a good fruit set anyway. And then there's some things that have male and female flowers, but they have to have the pollen from another tree to pollinate the females on the tree. And walnuts, chestnuts, for instance, are some examples of that. So and filbert. So there's some things, and apples are generally, they want a pollinator, separate species as well, or a separate variety. In other words, it's almost always good to have 2 of everything, I think, just for pollination.
Okay.
So I would suggest getting a second, but if you do your research, you can find out if it's indeed is self-pollinating or not. So you got to do a little bit of research there. I don't have all those memorized off the top of my head.
Right. It might be just fun to have two of them. They have lots of land.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions? And Mihaela, it's good if you sort of don't bounce things around too much when you're.
Sorry.
All right. Anybody else want to ask any questions, or just unmute yourselves at any time you like? Okay.
I'm just gonna pop in real quick here. We've had a couple of new people joining. I think 3 in the last couple of minutes. So I just wanted to welcome them real quick. Sorry to interrupt, but just wanted to welcome them and let them know that they're welcome to check in with me if they have any technical issues or questions. And Michael, there was one question in the chat from Rufina asking, how do you spell Paulownia?
How do you spell? You got it, except P-A-U, as in Paul. So Paulownia, and usually we're going to be after, here you're going to be after tomentosa. Tomentosa is the species name, because there's a number of Paulownia, and a lot of them are more like subtropical. And I will point out that I don't know what nationality you are or what any back there, but at any rate, Paulownia is a tree from Japan and China, and it's a famous tree. They plant millions of acres of Paulownia in China for the medicinal bark, partly for agroforestry systems as an overstory, and they use the leaves to fatten hogs. It is said that the best tasting pig or hog's meat has been fattened with Paulownia leaves as part of its diet. So we all know that that animals that we can change their flavor to some extent by what they're eating.
Wow.
But most of us don't think about that sort of thing, unless you happen to be the livestock producer. Okay, so I was talking about functions and products. I'd like to spend a little time talking about structure. And by the way, yeah, thanks to the new people, I don't know Janice and Wild Woman. I don't know if I know either of you, but I do know Janice's and Wild Woman, so you never know. The structure in the system, in a permaculture system, we, for the most part, are going to have overstory, middle story, understory, vine crops. We're going to have different statures of plants. A lot of times we're trying to mimic a forest or sometimes maybe a meadow. And so some people have the mistaken idea that permaculture systems are always really shady and covered with trees, and it's always an understory, overstory kind of forest situation. You can have a permaculture system that's completely open to the sun, that's allowed. But in general, if you have very much of a property at all, you're generally going to have shady areas, some taller statured stuff, and also you really want to have sunny areas for things, crops and plants that really like the sun. So the structure of the system, of a permaculture system, is usually complex. And so we can have medicinal trees for an overstory. I've done with using ginkgos and eastern black cherry for the bark, cascara for the bark, linden trees, mulberry trees. I planted a system in Twisp, Washington in the Methow Valley, which is one of my best systems I ever put in. 2 acres. I had 3,000 trees and shrubs crammed on 2 acres. That's 1,500 trees, shrubs per acre. Now that's a dense planting. Most people don't go there. But we get really fast canopy closure. And over time, as it does get too crowded, you can start thinning out the trees and selling them, which is what happened in this case. Or you can be coppicing them. In other words, you can cut them off to a stump and the stump will resprout. Almost all of our deciduous trees will resprout from a stump. And so if you get something, maybe 3, 4 inches in diameter, a tree maybe 2, 3, 4 years old, you can cut it down, strip all the bark off for the bark product, and then it will resprout. So you could do every other plant periodically, or you could cut them all down at the same time. There's different methods of coppicing, management of in a tree situation. If you're, yeah, I might go out. I always like to go out on a limb a little bit. Let's look at. I heard one time about a ginkgo plantation, commercial ginkgo leaf plantation in the southern U.S. that was growing their trees on a very short rotation, and like 2-3 years, very short, and then they would cut the trees down, harvest. You know, they were doing before they could get very tall, and they just couldn't harvest the leaves very easily. They kept the leaves close to the ground. So that means that they must coppice. I actually haven't, well, I have had ginkgos that have been, the top dies and they resprout. So yeah, so ginkgo will do that. So there's, the coppicing gives you a lot more management of your tree overstory as one of your options. Okay, maybe, let's, yeah.
So going back to that really dense planting, like about over 1,000 trees and plants per acre, what kind of preparation do you need to do for the soil to maintain, you know, a certain amount of fertility to be able to have to be able to feed all of those plants?
They, in a sense, the system becomes self-feeding. What I do in my systems is I put down in the very first year a lot of minerals. I'm really big on applying a lot of minerals in year 1, and then occasionally I might add a little something in year 2 or 3, but basically I don't add that mineral compound again. You know, that 20-year-old food forest has never had minerals put on after that first year. So a lot of times I put enough minerals on because the minerals are going to be recycled through in the system. And another thing that happens in these systems, that my soil biology goes up every year. I don't know if it's probably not eternally going up every year, but it can really go up a lot in the first 5 years. The number of earthworms in my systems usually is just really increases pretty rapidly. First year, I've started numerous times with hardly any earthworms in year 1. Year 2, I've got more. Year 3, more, and year 5, and you know. But after a while, it's just like it becomes super abundant in earthworms and other kinds of soil microorganisms, and particularly a lot of fungus, because I always have woody components in the system. So I have various kinds of fungi in the system. So the soil microbiology unlocks the fertility, the minerals that are locked up in the soil. It's oftentimes the case, especially on depleted or burnt out soils, is that there's nutrients in there, but they're not available because the soil life isn't freeing them up. So Elaine Ingham, who's one of our major soil scientists, she's maybe a little extreme for me, but she says that there is not a problem with soil fertility in virtually all soils, that it's just a matter of having enough soil biology to unlock it. But of course, I like to put lots of minerals in anyway, just to help things really get kick-started, really get that soil life going. And the roots of the plants are helping break up the soil, and the roots are actually part of the soil decompaction strategy, you might say. So yeah, I find that you take any forest out there in the wild, is somebody out there fertilizing it every year and putting in nitrogen or minerals? No. Those forests, all the natural forests of the world, the only fertilizer they're getting is a little bit of input from rainfall and wind. And some places that's more than others. So nature is really good at improving a system without outside or much outside inputs. So we're trying to mimic that in our permaculture.
I see. Thank you.
Okay, and other plants, maybe, you know, I like it when people mention plants they want me to throw a few ideas at in the medicinals. Okay, you better start making questions up ahead of time.
Sorry. Well, I wondered, are there any things to be concerned about? Like when I think about tomato plants and basil being sort of complementary in a garden because of what they pull out of the soil, are there some combinations that are really fantastic that you would recommend for medicinal plants, or some that you shouldn't do because they'll kind of deplete the soil?
Boy, that no one's there are various books on companion planting out there. And so a companion planting book goes only, usually it's focused on vegetables, less so. And so there's really not a whole lot of data on the compatibility. I mean, there is, but it's scattered in the literature. David Jackie's book on edible landscaping would have maybe some charts there, but I can't think of any, I can't think of a resource to send you to on that. A lot of it has to do with learned knowledge over time. I observe what works at my place and then what doesn't work at my place. And so I learned from that. But I would say this, though, almost all things do work well together. I would say that the things that don't work together are by much smaller than the ones that don't work together. Yeah, mainly they work. Some of the ones that are most or least likely to work are, of course, black walnut, very famous for putting chemicals into the soil that inhibit other things. Western red cedar, maple trees. There's quite a few of the trees that are, you might say, greedy for nutrients. The ones that have tree roots that come right to the surface of the soil, pretty much. Those are going to be most problematical. But I have seen spruce trees that are one of the most difficult of all trees to grow things under. And I was walking around a neighborhood, and there is a spruce tree that the guy had limbed up quite high up, maybe 25 feet up. The limbs were gone. And he had rhododendron planted under it and some azaleas and quite a few ground cover plants as well. In other words, he'd figured out things that would grow in that really acid environment, even with the root competition from that spruce. So I would say that there's really, I don't know if there's anything that is totally that you can't grow anything underneath in terms of an overstory. Yeah, and so, yeah, go ahead.
When you talked about the fungi, have you ever tried to plant morel spores along the roots of any of the trees?
No, I have not, but they do sell morel inoculant these days, probably fungi perfecti and other major sources. I have seen incredible morel mushroom stands growing on red cedar bark pathways. They'd spread red cedar bark, and they had just the most phenomenal morel mushroom flush I'd ever seen in my life by far. It was almost solid. You could hardly walk on the path without stepping on morel mushrooms. And that was there was dozens and dozens of, just a huge harvest. So it can be done, but morels is one of the trickier ones. It's only been recently that they sort of kind of figuring out the domestication aspect. But that brings up the question, what medicinal mushrooms can you incorporate in your system as well? Oyster mushrooms are medicinal. There's quite a few mushrooms that are medicinal. Some are polypores. We might even, if you wanted to stretch it, we might say that all mushrooms are medicinal.
Great Falls, Montana.
Oh, well, Janice, what's your last name?
Driver, you know me.
I recognize you now. Hi, Janice. Nice to see you. Great. You're still growing things out there, and your property is still moving along with the family?
Well, yeah.
Okay. Well, you better not go into private details here.
No, don't need to. But I have you said to suggest plants to grow in a permaculture food forest. Here in my part of the country, I would put Arnica and Valerian.
Uh-huh. Right. I am Valerian. There's a number of kinds of Valerian, and I'm just going to mention two here. One is the European Valerian. It gets to be a robust plant. I harvest the root usually at the end of the first year, or sometimes beginning of the second year, or sometimes I even let it get a year or two old. I get it a couple of years old, but I like to do it early, usually after 1 year. And if I grow them really well, I get a 1 pound root for a Valerian, up and even bigger. But I always let some go to seed. I let some get older and seed. And as a result, in my garden now, I consider my garden to be getting more medicinally mature when I have all the Valerian baby seedlings coming up that I can use in my system. So I never have to plant Valerian seed again. The seeds flies around the system, and then they pop up in unexpected places. I can move them around. A lot of times I just let them grow where they fall if they're not in the way of something else. And so in a good permaculture system, the system starts planting itself. You dig something up, something else springs up to take its place. So that things move around on their own. Some things do die, but other things are there to take its place. So a good permaculture system starts replanting itself. I think humans could hardly ever refrain from getting out there and messing with things and putting in new things. But that's one of my signs of success in my permaculture system is those Valerian seedlings. What a lot of people don't know is that we have a Sitka Valerian, a native Valerian. There's a couple other ones in Montana as well. You could bring those into your system. You probably have to find them in the wild, hard to find the seed, transplant some from the wild and increase your Valerian diversity. And what was the other one you mentioned there?
Arnica.
And Arnica. So have you had luck growing Arnica in your system?
Well, it's in our woods a lot. And then there's an Arnica that's grows in a sunny park too in our woods, in our forest.
Mhm.
So I think either one of those, I haven't tried because I usually go to the woods and harvest, but I think I probably could grow them. What do you think?
I think that if a person was really keen on arnica, they could set their life goal is to grow every single arnica species in the world on their property. Now there's a goal for you. How many arnica species are there in the world? Only 20? I'm not quite sure. It could easily be more, actually. But I've tried growing a number of them, and the kind you most commonly have there, Arnica cordifolia, I've had difficulty growing on in the garden, but not that I've tried very hard. But two arnicas easily to grow in the garden are Arnica Montana from Europe. And of course, if you're from Montana, like you are, Janice, growing Arnica Montana would be just great. And Arnica chamasonis. And I think when I talked to, in one of my other webinars here, I've done a lot of talk about Arnica, so I won't go too far there. But I would definitely try the European Arnica and the Arnica chamasonis, the meadow Arnica, are the two easy ones I know. Okay, so there are some understory plants like Pipsissewa and wild ginger and sarsaparilla. All those grow in Montana. They need a forest soil that has a lot of duff layer in it. It has a lot of humus. And so I can plant all kinds of trees and shrubs, etc., in my garden, but sometimes I won't have the right soil conditions for certain ground covers for maybe 10 years, 20 years to build up the system to where it can grow some of those things, at least in a very wide scale. Let's see here, 145. Let me just talk briefly about understory plants, because I have several people right now asking me for advice on what medicinal plants they can grow in their understory. And so I've got a list here of understory plants for in the shade. In other words, understory being under another story. And of course, golden seal and ginseng are probably two of the most famous understory medicinals. There's another one called mayapple from the eastern US. There's the native fall Solomon seal and star-flowered Solomon seal, the Myanthemum species. They're a great native understory. Bleeding heart. If you can get enough of an overstory, when can you get the bleeding heart? And again, that's going to need a humusy area. However, you can jump the game. Let's say it's going to take me 20 years to build up the right kind of humus duff soil that I could grow some of these things in here, like bloodroot would be another one. A wild ginger, vanilla leaf, our Northwest vanilla leaf for Western Washington at any rate. You can dump a lot of peat moss into a soil, bales, buy some bales of peat moss. You can make some beds that you really improve. I'm going to give you an example here. There's a understory plant here, and I'm trying to think of the name here. It's false. Let's see if I can find it here on my list here. Sweet flag, lily of the valley, wild ginger, bloodroot, sweet violet. Such a long list. Oh, spikenard. If you could grow spikenard, the world would come to your door. That was the famous oil that Mary Magdalene anointed the feet of Jesus with, made it famous, spikenard. Maybe I'll find that Latin for you in a minute here. But I'm still going through here trying to find my, I'm not going to find it. small flowered, short-term robust. Yeah, false unicorn root. Anyway, it's a plant that grows in eastern United States. It needs an acid understory. Very difficult to grow. I grew a bunch one time and was just not going well. And I eventually planted them out in a bed where I've added a lot of peat moss. Blood meal also brings down increases acidity. I started out with a very alkaline soil in Montana, mind you. I was in Montana in an alkaline soil in a hot, arid field, and just the opposite of what it wanted. It wanted shade, cool, moist, acid soil. So I made the right kind of soil. I put those things in there, and then I put on a top dressing of a very fine kind of sawdust material that was aged. And as soon as I put that on, within about a couple of weeks, all these little baby mushrooms started popping up from that mulch I put down. And that is when the unicorn root finally started surviving and started growing. It needed to have a fungal root symbiosis. A lot of these understory plants that are somewhat difficult to grow and need that humus, it's because they need a fungal component in the soil to ally themselves with. We call it mycorrhizal obligate. They need, and blueberries and huckleberries are like that as well. So those systems, we have to make sure that we bring in good fungus into, that we bring in have a good fungal component in our system so that they can survive. Okay, so we went off on a tangent there, but all tangents add up to, help in the long run. So whatever niche I have on my property, I need to make a list of plants or find a list of plants that will grow there. For instance, some people have land that's really wet, high water table, or possibly even seasonal flooding. And so what will grow, and let's see if I have a list there for that. What will grow where it's really wet ground? And there's, let's see here, I have to go for the ground covers and shade. Water plants, perennially wet edges. I'm not finding quite what I'm looking for, but perennially wet edges. A bayberry here in the, there's various bayberry or America species. There's Biden species, Pennyroyal skullcap, Labrador tea. If I had a really acid soil, really, and relatively, and wet, Labrador tea was worth a try. Willows, of course, watercress. If you actually have water, you can grow bog bean or cattails or sweet flag, wapato. There's what are the water plants that are medicinal? There's a number of them. What if you have a soil that's almost pure sand, for instance, like I have right here? There's a lot of things that like to grow in sand, probably more than not. Or what if you had a soil that's like super gravelly and super well drained, and as a consequence, it's hard to grow anything that's shallow rooted, because the water quickly sinks below the surface. But there are certain plants that love to grow in gravel. So you find gravel plants, sand plants, plants that grow where it's really dry. Here and where I live, some dry ones would be, for instance, could be Oregon grape. Here on the so it depends. Actually, what we call dry here in Western Washington is not going to be the same as dry over there and Helena, Montana, or Great Falls. So there's different levels of dryness. And so you have to find what plants grow where it's really clay, high pH, low pH. And I can't give you those lists right here, but those are the kind of lists. I collect garden books that give lists. Like I collect books that say gardening in the shade, growing in dry, growing in arid regions. And a lot of times they'll give me plant lists. So I have dozens and dozens of books with plant lists. I can look up wetland plants. I have books for wetland plants. So whenever I'm dealing with a particular type of soil, or I can refer to these lists that will help me figure it out. And so then I look through the list and I'll say, oh, that has edible, that has medicinal, that would be a good permaculture plant. So I look through a list of ornamentals generally, and then pull out the ones that are going to have the qualities that I want. So I am going, if for those of you who are watching this and you want more lists, I can send you a list. Here's some crop categories and crops for north temperate regions or climates. And in this list, I have 1,800 crops pulled out, listed in 125 crop categories. So far, I've been focusing on medicine, but I have, fruits, seeds, nuts, spices, essential oils, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So 1,800 crops. And then I think in my medicinal part of that, there's 580 medicinal plants. So this is quite a long list. And actually you can find it on my website, friendsofthetrees.net. If you go to, there's a button called content up at the top. And if under content is articles. And if you open articles and you go to page 2, there's that whole list of crop categories and crops for north temperate climates that's just sitting there. I should find out if, hopefully it has a PDF download that you can print it out. If not, let me know. But at any rate, it's a great list, and it's just a start, but 1,800 crops is a pretty good sized list to start with, give you something to research. And at any rate, so I'll refer people to that as far as a reference. Let's see. What else? You got questions or comments here at this?
I have a question. Hi, Skeeter. You mentioned that the coppicing of the ginkgo, that they were doing it every few years and harvesting it. What were they actually harvesting from the ginkgo that they were?
The leaves, the ginkgo leaves.
Okay.
So they're only harvesting it once a year in the fall, late fall, probably when they're turning from green to yellow.
Right.
At that time period.
I've heard that too. Yes. Good.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Do you have where do you, where do you get plants? I mean, recommend getting plants.
Oh my goodness, that's a big question. I used to keep a file cabinet full of nursery catalogs and seed catalogs, and this was a 3-bay, 2 feet long. In other words, I had my catalogs. I think it would have been something like 9 feet row of catalogs. So I really kept a lot of track. I don't keep up like I don't maintain that. But these days, of course, Google it. And I sell a lot of medicinal plant propagation material myself. So I am actually a good source, and I have a lot of seeds as well, herb seeds. So I'm a good source for herb seeds, and I will put out a plug for myself. Is that I grow so many seeds that I don't have to weigh it out in little careful amounts in those seed packets. I like to put a lot of seeds in my seed packets. And so I would like to think that I think it's probably likely that of all the seed companies that sell herb seeds, you'll get more seeds per packet in mine than from about anybody else. yeah, I'm always happy to hear any comparisons out there. But so we specialize in herb seeds as one of our specialties. But one of them is also education, and so we'll be doing more and more. Here I am doing more webinars these days, but I like doing things with in-person people. So I want to come to Montana and do another herb gathering or herb event over there and do a workshop. Hopefully I'll be doing an herb gathering this summer, COVID and governor willing. And my next, for next week, the topic for this webinar, the last of the series here I'll be doing, is called Ecosystem Restoration Camps and Medicinal Plants. It's just, I think on the right now it just says Ecosystem Restoration Camps, but I'll be talking about how do ecosystem restoration camps fit wildcrafting and herb growing. So it'll be much more wide ranging than just, anyway, that's a big topic. Ecosystem restoration camps, the world needs a lot more of them. So hopefully we'll get a bit more turnout next week, but we'll record it nonetheless. So thank you very much to Finnriver and to Evelyn for hosting this series. And you can, if you like this, you can spread the word, tell more people. And I'm having fun, and I wish I had 2 weeks. Okay.
Thanks so much for being here. It was so great to see a couple more faces on today. That was definitely exciting to see that. And yeah, thanks for being here, and we'll hopefully see y'all next week.
Okay. Bye, y'all.